My name is Claire Matthews. I'm 45 years old, and at my husband's CEO dinner, they mocked my dress, called me just a trophy wife, and my husband laughed along. That night, I smiled through humiliation and showed them exactly who owned the company they worked for. If you've ever been underestimated or disrespected, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where are you watching from. Because this story, this moment that changed everything, it needs to be heard. It needs to be shared. Because maybe somewhere out there, someone is sitting in the same silence I sat in for years. And they need to know that silence can be strategic, that patience can be power, that the woman they ignore might just be the one holding all the cards. Let me take you back. Let me show you who I was before that night. Before everything changed. Before I stopped pretending. My morning started at 5:30. Every single morning. The alarm would go off in the darkness, and I'd slip out of bed so quietly that Daniel wouldn't even stir. He needed his sleep, you see. He had important meetings, important calls, an important life. I would pad downstairs in my slippers, the house still dark and silent around me, and I'd begin the ritual. Fresh coffee, the expensive beans he preferred, ground just right. Eggs, cooked to exact specifications. Toast, lightly buttered, cut diagonally. Fresh squeezed orange juice. The newspaper ironed flat, open to the business section, placed at precisely the right angle next to his plate. By the time he came down at 7, showered and dressed in one of his perfect suits, everything would be ready. Picture perfect. Wife perfect. I'd be sitting there with my own coffee, already dressed, makeup applied, hairstyled, looking like the image of the successful executive's spouse. He'd walk in, barely glance at me, pick up the newspaper, and eat in silence. Sometimes he'd grunt a thanks, most times, nothing at all. I was part of the furniture, part of the carefully curated life he'd built, the beautiful home, the expensive car, the attractive wife who kept everything running smoothly in the background. Do you know what that feels like? To work so hard to be invisible? To perfect the art of being exactly what someone wants while slowly disappearing. I'd watch him eat the breakfast I made, read the newspaper I'd prepared, and he wouldn't even look at me. Wouldn't ask how I slept. Wouldn't ask what I had planned for the day. Because he already knew, didn't he? What could I possibly have planned? I was just Claire. Just the wife. Just the woman who existed in the margins of his important life. After he left, I'd clean up the kitchen until it sparkled. I'd make the beds with hospital corners. I'd ensure every surface in our home was pristine. And then, when the house was empty and perfect and silent, I'd go into my study, the small room at the back of the house that Daniel never entered because it wasn't important enough for his attention, and I'd work, really work. The kind of work that had nothing to do with fresh squeezed orange juice and everything to do with the business degree I'd earned summa cum laude before I met him. The kind of work that utilized the strategic mind I'd inherited from my father, who'd built his own empire from nothing before he died and left me everything. They all thought I was just the pretty girl who'd married well. Daniel's colleagues, his friends, the people in our social circle. They'd see me at dinners and charity events, always perfectly dressed, always smiling, always quiet, and they'd think they knew exactly who I was. Trophy wife, lucky woman. Married to power because she couldn't create her own. If only they'd looked closer. If only they'd wondered why I never seemed bothered by their condescension. Why I never fought for attention or tried to prove myself in their conversations. Why I was always so calm, so controlled, so perfectly content to fade into the background. My father taught me something before he died. He taught me that real power doesn't announce itself. Real power doesn't need to. Real power sits quiet and patient and builds its foundations so deep, so strong that by the time anyone notices, it's already unshakable. When he left me his investments, his carefully constructed portfolio worth more than anyone knew, he also left me his lawyer, Marcus Chen, a man who understood discretion the way most people understand breathing. Together, we'd been building something, slowly, carefully, strategically. While I was making Daniel's breakfast and organizing his dry cleaning and being dismissed as decoration, I was acquiring shares, Small amounts at first. Through shell companies and private holdings and investment firms with names that meant nothing to anyone, we'd buy when the market dipped. We'd purchase from retiring board members. We'd quietly accumulate stock in the company where Daniel worked his way up the ladder, so proud of his corner office and his executive title and his seat near the head of the table. Month by month, year by year, the percentages added up. 5%, then 12, then 23, then 41, then 55, then 68. 68%. Let me say that again. 68% of the company my husband worked for, the company he thought defined his worth, the company he'd brag about at dinner parties while introducing me as just my wife Claire, I owned it. Me. The woman who was treated like expensive wallpaper. The woman whose opinions were never asked for because everyone assumed she didn't have any. I owned the majority share, which meant I owned the company, which meant I owned the power that every single person in Daniel's world spent their lives chasing. And I'd done it all in silence. In secret. While being patted on the head and dismissed and talked over and ignored. While watching Daniel come home and complain about office politics and difficult decisions and never, not once, ask me what I thought, because what could I possibly know about business? I just arranged flowers and planned dinner parties, right? I was just the pretty face on his arm at company events. God, the anger I carried. You have to understand, it wasn't just about being ignored. It was about being erased. Every day, I felt myself becoming smaller in his eyes, in everyone's eyes, even though I was building something immense. Every dismissive comment, every time I was interrupted or spoken over, every introduction where I was just the wife with no name of my own, it cut deeper, but I smiled through it. I perfected the art of the pleasant expression, the agreeable nod, the quiet exit when the men wanted to talk business. I became exactly what they expected, which made me invisible, which gave me freedom. Freedom to work, to plan, to build my empire while they built their egos. Daniel never asked about my inheritance, never wondered what happened to my father's money. He assumed, I suppose, that it was his now too. That marriage meant what was mine was his, even if what was his stayed his. He never asked because he wasn't interested. My life before him, my education, my capabilities, my father's business acumen that ran through my veins, none of it mattered because I was just the wife now, just Claire, just the woman who made sure his socks were organized by color and his mother got a birthday card signed with both our names. The rage built so slowly I barely noticed it at first. Or maybe I did notice, but I channeled it, turned it into fuel. Every condescending smile became motivation for another stock purchase. Every time I was excluded from a conversation became another reason to make another strategic move. Every time Daniel came home and walked past me like I was, furniture became another moment of clarity about what I was building and why it mattered. I wasn't just acquiring a company, I was acquiring my dignity back. My identity, my power. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. The company had closed a major merger, and Daniel's CEO, Richard Thornton, was hosting an elaborate event at the Regency Hotel, black tie. The city's elite. The kind of evening where appearances mattered more than anything else. Daniel told me about it 3 days before. In that tone he used when he was giving me instructions rather than invitations. Wear something elegant but not too flashy. Be charming but don't monopolize conversations. Look beautiful but don't outshine the important guests. Be perfect, in other words, but also be invisible. Be there, but don't really be there. I spent hours choosing my dress. I selected a black designer gown, elegant and timeless, the kind of dress that whispered wealth rather than shouted it. I had my hair done professionally, swept up in a classic style. Subtle jewelry, expensive but understated. When I looked in the mirror before we left, I saw exactly what I'd intended. A woman who looked like she belonged in that world, but wouldn't threaten anyone in it. Perfect camouflage. The last time, I remember thinking that I dressed to disappear. The ballroom at the Regency was excessive in that way. Expensive events always are. Crystal chandeliers throwing prismatic light across tables laden with orchids and fine china. A string quartet playing something classical and forgettable in the corner. Waiters in crisp uniforms circulating with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that cost more per bite than some people's daily wage. And everywhere, the beautiful people. The powerful people. The people who mattered. Daniel worked the room immediately, gravitating toward the clusters of executives and board members, shaking hands and laughing too loudly at jokes that probably weren't funny. I followed at the appropriate distance, smiling when smiled at, accepting champagne I didn't drink, being exactly what was expected. And slowly, inevitably, I ended up in the orbit of the wives. The other women who were there as accessories, as proof of their husband's success and good taste. Jennifer Thornton, the CEO's wife, held court in a cluster near the bar. She was draped in diamonds and designer labels, her face tight from too many procedures, her laugh sharp and brittle. Around her were the others: Margaret, Susan, Lisa, Catherine, women I'd seen at dozens of these events over the years. Women who'd never once asked me a meaningful question but had plenty to say when they thought I wasn't listening. I joined their circle with my perfect smile, and for a while it was the usual surface conversation: the weather, the hotel, someone's recent vacation. But then Jennifer's eyes swept over me, pausing at my dress, and her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. That moment. God. That moment. I can still feel it like ice water down my spine. She said, loud enough for the surrounding conversations to pause, "Claire, darling, is that dress vintage?" But the way she said it, you could hear it, the mockery wrapped in false sweetness. The implication that vintage meant old, outdated, that I'd either chosen poorly or couldn't afford current fashion. The other women's eyes swiveled to me, assessing, and I could see the agreement in their expressions even before they spoke. "It's classic," I said calmly, still smiling. "Of course," Margaret chimed in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Classic is such a nice way to say timeless, or, well, not exactly current, but that's fine for some people." They laughed. This horrible, tinkling laugh that was all edges. And I stood there, glass in hand, smile fixed, while they picked apart my appearance like vultures with a carcass. The dress was too simple, too last season, too safe. Didn't I want to make an impression? Didn't I want to stand out? Although, Susan added with a pointed look, maybe it was better that I didn't try too hard. After all, I wasn't actually part of the business. I didn't need to impress anyone professionally. "Must be so relaxing," Jennifer said, leaning in conspiratorially, while the others nodded along, not having the pressure of a real career. "Just being able to focus on, what do you do all day exactly, Claire? Lunch with friends? Shopping? Yoga?" Catherine laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "She doesn't need a job. She has Daniel. Must be nice living off your husband and not having to worry about anything real." Living off my husband. The words hit me like a slap, but I didn't flinch, couldn't flinch. Because that's what they expected. They expected me to blush and stammer and make excuses for my existence. They wanted to see me diminished because it made them feel larger. Because in a world where they were all appendages to their husband's success, tearing down another woman was the only power they had. But what made it unbearable, what turned humiliation into something molten and dangerous in my chest, was the sound of familiar laughter joining theirs. I turned, champagne glass still raised, smile still frozen in place, and saw Daniel, my husband, standing just close enough to have heard everything, surrounded by his colleagues, Richard Thornton and Marcus Webb and James Patterson, and he was laughing, not defending me, not changing the subject, not even looking uncomfortable. He was laughing with them, his face red with amusement, nodding along like the mockery of his wife was the funniest thing he'd heard all evening. Richard Thornton clapped Daniel on the shoulder and said something I could just barely hear. "At least she's decorative, right, Dan? That's what matters. A beautiful wife is the best business card a successful man can have." And Daniel, my husband of 15 years, the man I'd built a life around even while he erased me from it, grinned and raised his own glass in a mock toast. "She does know how to look good at these things," I'll give her that. Keeps the home fires burning while the real work gets done. The real work. While the real work gets done. As if everything I'd done for years, the strategic acquisitions and careful planning and brilliant maneuvering that had built an empire they couldn't even see, as if all of that was nothing. As if I was nothing, just decoration. Just the pretty wife who picked out vintage dresses and lived off her husband's success and had no purpose beyond making him look good. Something crystallized in that moment. All the years of swallowing anger, of being strategic and patient and playing the long game, all of it suddenly sharpened into perfect clarity. I'd been planning to wait, to continue building quietly until I had every piece in place, until the timing was absolutely perfect. But standing there in my mocked dress, holding champagne I didn't want, listening to my husband join in the humiliation, I realized the timing was perfect, not in the way I'd originally planned, but perfect nonetheless. Because they'd handed me the moment. They'd created the exact scenario that would make what I was about to do not just justified, but poetic. They thought they were punching down at someone powerless. They were about to discover they'd been dancing on a trapdoor the whole time. I took a slow breath, steadied myself, let the smile on my face shift just slightly, from pleasant to something else, something sharper. I raised my glass higher, and the small motion caught attention. Jennifer paused mid-laugh. Catherine's eyes narrowed slightly. The men's conversation faltered. In the ripple of silence, I spoke. My voice was calm, clear, carrying across the suddenly quiet space around us. Interesting words, I said, looking directly at Catherine. From people whose paychecks I personally approve. Silence, complete, total silence. The string quartet in the corner seemed to sense the shift and trailed off mid-phrase. Every eye in our section of the ballroom turned toward me. I watched confusion flicker across their faces. Saw Jennifer's condescending smile freeze and crack slightly. Saw Daniel's expression shift from amusement to confusion to something that might have been the first whisper of concern. "I'm sorry?" Catherine said, her voice sharp but uncertain. "What did you just say?" I turned to face the wider group, taking in all of them. The wives who'd just been mocking me. The executives who'd been laughing at their husbands' jokes. Richard Thornton, the CEO, staring at me with a mix of confusion and irritation that someone's wife had interrupted the flow of the evening. And Daniel, my husband, looking at me like he'd never seen me before, like I'd suddenly become visible after years of transparency. I said. I repeated, setting my champagne glass down on a nearby table with a soft click that sounded thunderous in the quiet. It's interesting to hear comments about living off my husband from people whose entire livelihoods depend on my approval. Or did none of you ever wonder who the majority shareholder of this company actually is? Richard Thornton stepped forward, his face reddening. "Now see here, Mrs. Matthews. I don't know what you think you know, but this is hardly the time or place for whatever joke you're trying to make." "It's not a joke, Richard," I said, and the use of his first name without the deferential Mr., without the appropriate distance a wife should maintain from her husband's boss, made him blink. "The majority shareholder of Thornton Industries is Clearwater Holdings. I'm sure you're familiar with the name. It's been on all the quarterly reports for the past 4 years, ever-growing stake. Currently sitting at 68% of all outstanding shares. Clearwater is a private investment firm," Richard said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "Based overseas. We've never even met the principals." "The principal," I corrected. "Singular. And you've met her dozens of times. You've just never bothered to actually see her because she was always on some man's arm, wearing dresses you found amusingly outdated. Living a life you assumed was frivolous and empty." I reached into my clutch, pulled out my phone, and pulled up the documents Marcus had prepared for eventual use. Documents I'd thought I wouldn't need for another 6 months but had kept ready just in case. Clearwater Holdings is my company, built with my inheritance, carefully structured to maintain privacy while acquiring controlling interest in several firms, including this one. As of last quarter's filing, I own 68.3% of Thornton Industries, which means, effectively, I own you. I turned the phone around, showing the incorporation documents, the stock certificates, the ownership records. Watched their faces as they leaned in, as they read, as comprehension dawned in slow, horrible stages. Marcus Webb pulled out his own phone, clearly searching for verification. James Patterson had gone pale. Richard Thornton looked like he'd been struck. And Daniel. Oh, Daniel. My husband stood frozen, his champagne glass halfway to his lips, his face draining of all color, his eyes wide with an emotion I'd never seen there before when looking at me. Fear. He was afraid. Of me, the wife he'd ignored. The decoration he'd taken for granted. For the first time in our entire marriage, I had his complete, undivided, terrified attention. That's impossible, Jennifer Thornton said, but her voice shook. You're just a housewife. You don't have that kind of money. You don't have that kind of knowledge. Don't I? I turned to her with a smile that held no warmth at all. My father was Julian Ashford. You might remember him. Built Ashford Enterprises from nothing and sold it for $800 million before he died, left everything to his only daughter. His very well-educated daughter who graduated top of her class from Wharton Business School before she made the mistake of marrying a man who thought her only value was in looking pretty at dinners. I watched that information sink in. Watched them recalculate everything they thought they knew. Every dismissive comment. Every condescending smile. Every time they treated me like I was empty-headed and useless. All of it recontextualizing in real time across their faces. For years, I continued, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest, I've watched this company operate, and I've watched all of you operate within it. Did you think I wasn't paying attention? Did you think I didn't notice the creative accounting, Richard? The way you've been funneling company resources into personal investments? Or you, Marcus, with your insider trading that you thought was too small scale to trigger investigations? James, should we talk about the harassment settlements the company has been quietly paying out to keep your behavior from becoming public knowledge? Marcus Webb's phone nearly dropped from his hand. James Patterson actually stumbled backward. Richard Thornton's face had gone from red to purple. Around us, other guests were watching now, drawn by the tension, by the shift in power so palpable you could taste it. I've had forensic accountants reviewing every filing, every expense report, every decision made by this executive team for the past 2 years, I said. Building a complete picture. Waiting for the right moment. I was going to wait longer, be even more thorough, but you've handed me something better than perfect timing. You've handed me perfect justification. I looked at each of the wives who'd mocked me, seeing their expressions range from shock to horror to desperate attempts to backtrack visible in their eyes. Living off my husband, you said. No real job. Just relaxing all day while the real work gets done. Tell me, Catherine, how's your husband's position as VP of Operations treating you? That salary and benefits package must be nice. 6-figure bonus, last year. If I remember the compensation reports correctly, it would be unfortunate if that position was suddenly eliminated due to restructuring. Catherine's face went white. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked desperately at her husband who was standing frozen among the other executives, unable to help her, unable to help himself. Jennifer. I turned to the CEO's wife. That house in the Hamptons that the company purchased as an executive retreat, but that you've been using as a personal vacation home. That's technically misappropriation of corporate assets. Small scale compared to some of the other issues, but still something that would look very bad if it came out publicly. And it will come out. All of it will. Claire. Daniel finally found his voice, stepping toward me with his hands raised like he was approaching a dangerous animal. Claire, let's talk about this privately. Whatever you think you know, whatever you're planning, we can discuss it at home. There's no need to make a scene. I laughed. Actually laughed. The sound surprised even me, bitter and sharp. A scene? You're worried about a scene? You just stood there and laughed while your colleagues mocked your wife. Called me decoration. A business card. Implied I was useless and empty and living off your success. You humiliated me in front of all these people, and now you want to avoid a scene? I didn't mean he started, but I cut him off. You did mean it, that's exactly the problem. You meant every dismissive comment, every time you introduced me as just your wife, every morning you didn't even look at me over the breakfast I made you. You meant all of it because you genuinely believe I'm less than you. That I'm an accessory to your life rather than a person with my own mind and capabilities and power. I stepped closer to him, watching him actually step back. But here's what you didn't know while you were building your career on my patience. I was building an empire on your ignorance. Every time you didn't ask what I did all day, I was acquiring more shares. Every time you dismissed me in conversations, I was having very different conversations with lawyers and accountants and investment advisors. Every time you thought I was just the pretty quiet wife, I was becoming the person who controlled everything you thought defined your worth. Richard Thornton tried to regain some authority, drawing himself up. This is clearly an emotional outburst. We can address any concerns you have through proper channels. There's a board meeting next month where you'll no longer be CEO. I finished for him. As majority shareholder, I'm calling an emergency board meeting for Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. At which point I'll be presenting evidence of multiple breaches of fiduciary duty, conflicts of interest, and misappropriation of company resources. You'll be removed for cause, which means no golden parachute, no generous severance package, just termination, and very likely legal consequences. The music had stopped completely now. The entire ballroom seemed to be watching, conversations dying as word spread through the room that something dramatic was happening. I could feel their eyes on me, could sense phones being raised to record, could imagine the social media posts already being composed, and I didn't care. Let them watch, let them record. Let the whole world see what happened when you underestimated the quiet woman in the outdated dress. You can't do this, Daniel said, and his voice cracked. Claire, please, think about what you're doing. Think about my career, about our life together. Our life together? I turned to him, and I let him see everything I'd been hiding for years. All the hurt and anger and loneliness. All the mornings I'd made breakfast for a man who wouldn't even look at me. All the evenings I'd listened to him complain about work and never once valued my input. All the years I'd been erased and diminished and treated like beautiful furniture. We don't have a life together, Daniel. We have a life where you exist and I serve. Where you matter and I'm scenery. Where you're a person and I'm a role. That's not a partnership. That's not a marriage. That's ownership. And the irony, the beautiful irony that you're just now understanding, is that the whole time you thought you owned me, I actually owned you. I picked up my clutch, smoothed down my vintage dress, and looked around at all of them one last time. The executives with their guilty faces and their crumbling confidence. The wives with their designer labels and their sudden understanding that they'd attack someone who could destroy their comfortable lives with a signature. My husband, the powerful executive, looking smaller and more afraid than I'd ever seen him. Enjoy the rest of your evening, I said pleasantly, as if we'd just been discussing the weather. Monday morning, 9 a.m. I'll see the executive team and board members then. The rest of you might want to update your resumes. And then I walked out, walked through that silent ballroom in my mocked dress with my head high and my spine straight, and the crowd parted for me like I was royalty, like I was power, like I was exactly what I'd built myself to become while they'd all been too blind to notice. The last thing I heard before the ballroom doors closed behind me was the sudden eruption of voices, everyone talking at once, the carefully controlled, elegant evening dissolving into chaos. I didn't go home. Couldn't face the thought of seeing Daniel there, in the space I'd maintained so perfectly while building my secret empire. Instead, I checked into a suite at a different hotel, called Marcus Chen, my lawyer, and told him it was time. Time to stop being quiet. Time to execute the plans we'd been holding in reserve. Time to stop playing the long game and start ending it. He arrived within an hour with a team of associates, all carrying briefcases full of documents. We worked through the night, finalizing everything: the emergency board meeting announcement, the evidence packages, the press release, the forensic audit reports, the restructuring plans. Every piece of the puzzle I'd been assembling for years, now ready to fall into place. At around 3 in the morning, my phone started ringing. Daniel. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Voicemail. Again and again and again. Each call a small vindication. He'd never called me this persistently in our entire marriage, never needed me this desperately, never even noticed I existed with this much intensity. It was only when his power was threatened that I became real to him. The voicemail started desperate and escalated to panic. Claire, please, we need to talk. Claire, I know you're upset, but you can't just destroy everything. Claire, think about what you're doing to me, to us, please. Claire, I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. Can we please just talk about this? Each message made my resolve harder, because even in his apologies, he was thinking about himself, what I was doing to him, his career, his reputation, not what he'd done to me for years, not how he'd systematically erased my identity until I was nothing but a reflection of his success. Morning came. Marcus and his team left to prepare for the board meeting. I showered, dressed in a sharp business suit I'd purchased months ago but never had reason to wear, and sat in my hotel suite drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. At 7 a.m., I received a text from the building security at our house. Daniel had left 20 minutes prior, heading to the office, probably, to try to do damage control, to call in favors, to find some way to stop what was coming. At 8, I returned home. The house was exactly as I'd left it yesterday before the dinner, perfect and empty and beautiful in that soulless way that expensive things can be. I made myself breakfast, a quiet rebellion in doing it for myself after years of doing it for him, and at 8:30, right on schedule, 3 black cars pulled into our driveway. The forensic audit team I'd hired, led by Margaret Zimmerman, a woman with a reputation for finding financial irregularities the way bloodhounds find scents. I let them in, provided the access codes and passwords I'd long ago discovered, and watched them spread through Daniel's home office like a professional tide. They'd find everything. I knew they would, because I'd already found it over months of careful investigation. But they'd find it officially, documentably, in a way that would hold up in court and board meetings and public opinion. At 9 a.m. exactly, I received a text from Marcus. Board meeting commenced. Dee showed up with 3 lawyers. Doesn't matter. We have the votes. It's done. It's done. 2 words. The end of years of quiet work. The culmination of patience and strategy and rage channeled into something constructive and devastating. I sat in my perfect kitchen in my empty house and felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. Free, powerful, visible, real. By noon, the news had leaked. Not surprising given how many people had witnessed the dinner confrontation. But the story that emerged was better than anything I could have planned. Social media was on fire with eyewitness accounts. CEO's wife reveals she actually owns the company. Trophy wife drops nuclear bomb at executive dinner. Woman humiliated by husband's colleagues turns out to be their boss. The narrative wasn't just about corporate intrigue. It was about justice. About a woman underestimated and dismissed who'd been quietly building power the whole time. By 2 p.m., major business networks had picked it up. By 4 p.m., I was getting calls from reporters, from talk shows, from magazines. Everyone wanted the story. Everyone wanted to know how I'd done it, how I'd maintained the secret, how it felt to reveal it, what I was planning next. I declined all interviews. Let the mystery build. Let them speculate. My silence had been my weapon for years. It could continue to be. The executives were suspended by end of day Monday. By Wednesday, the forensic audit had found enough evidence to terminate Richard Thornton for cause, along with Marcus Webb and James Patterson. Others were demoted or put on probation. The company's board, now firmly under my control through the voting power of my shares, appointed an interim CEO I'd selected. A woman, as it happened, someone with integrity and vision who'd been passed over for promotion for years because she didn't fit their old boys club culture. Daniel came home that first night after the board meeting looking like he'd aged a decade. His perfect suit was rumpled. His confident posture was gone. He found me in the living room, reading a book, a glass of wine beside me, perfectly calm. He stood in the doorway staring at me like he'd never seen me before. And I suppose in a way he hadn't. "Why?" he finally asked, just that one word. I looked up from my book. Why what? Why did I build a company? Why did I acquire shares? Why did I keep it secret? Why did I reveal it when I did? You'll need to be more specific. Why did you let me humiliate you for years if you had this kind of power the whole time? I set my book down carefully. I didn't let you do anything, Daniel. You chose to humiliate me. You chose to dismiss me. You chose to treat me like I was less than you every single day of our marriage. I just chose to build something while you were busy not seeing me. I didn't, he started, but I cut him off. You did. You absolutely did. And tonight isn't about you asking why I had the audacity to have a life and power you didn't know about. Tonight is about lawyers and divorce papers and asset division. His face went even paler. Divorce? Claire, we can work through this. I know I haven't been the best husband, but… The best husband? I laughed without humor. Daniel, you've barely been a husband at all. You've been a man who lived in a house I maintained, ate food I prepared, wore clothes I organized, and never once treated me like a partner, like an equal, like a person who mattered. I'll change, he said desperately. I see you now. I see what you're capable of. We can be partners now. Real partners. You and me, running the company together. And there it was. The thing that made me certain divorce was the only option. Because even now, even after everything, he didn't see me. He saw my power. He saw my usefulness to him. He saw a new way to use me, to benefit from me, to attach himself to my success instead of the other way around. He didn't want me. He wanted what I had. Just like he always had, only now what I had was too big to ignore. No, I said simply. The lawyers will be here tomorrow at 10 a.m. I suggest you find your own legal representation. He tried to argue, spent hours that night alternating between anger and pleading and bargaining. I listened to none of it. Slept in the guest room with the door locked. And in the morning, when Marcus arrived with his team, I started the process of extracting myself from the last tie to the man who'd spent 15 years making me invisible. The divorce was ugly. Daniel fought for half of everything, claiming that we'd built our life together, that he deserved community property rights, that my company had been grown during our marriage. But my lawyers were better than his, and more importantly, the truth was on my side. Clearwater Holdings had been built with my premarital inheritance, kept carefully separate from any community property, structured specifically to be protected from exactly this kind of claim. He left the marriage with what he'd brought to it and nothing more. The media loved every minute of it. The story had everything they wanted: power, betrayal, humiliation, revenge, justice. I became a symbol almost overnight. Women reached out to me from everywhere, sharing their own stories of being underestimated and dismissed, of being treated as less than, of being told their only value was in supporting someone else's dreams. The response was overwhelming and heartbreaking and infuriating all at once. My daughter Emma, who was away at college when everything exploded, came home for a long weekend about a month after the dinner. She'd seen everything play out in the media, had gotten my side of it in phone calls. But this was the first time we'd been face to face since my life had detonated. We sat in my study, the room where I'd built my empire in secret, and she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Was it worth it?" she finally asked. "You won. You destroyed them. You got everything you wanted. But you're alone now. Dad's gone. The friends you had in that social circle are gone. You're powerful, but are you happy?" I thought about that for a long time before answering. Because she wasn't wrong. The victory had come at a cost. I'd spent years being lonely in my marriage, and now I was lonely outside of it. The difference was that now my loneliness was a choice rather than a sentence. Now I was alone because I'd chosen dignity over companionship, because I'd chosen self-respect over social acceptance. I'm not sure happy is the right word. I told her honestly. But I'm free. I'm visible. I matter. For years, I felt like I was slowly disappearing, like I was being erased by everyone's assumption that I didn't matter. Now I matter. Maybe too much, maybe in ways that are uncomfortable. But I exist, Emma. I exist as myself, not as someone's wife or someone's decoration or someone's assumption. And yes, that's worth it. My dignity was worth it. My self-respect was worth it. If the price of being seen is being alone, I'll pay it. She nodded slowly. I'm glad you did it. I'm glad you showed them. I wish you hadn't had to. I wish Dad had actually seen you from the beginning. I wish those people had treated you like a person. I wish the world was different. Me too, I said. But it's not. So we work with what we have, and what I have now is power. Real power. The kind that can actually change things. And that became my focus. Once the dust settled, once the executives were gone and the company was stable under new leadership, once my divorce was final and Daniel was erased from my daily life, I started thinking about what to do with the power I'd claimed so publicly. Because Emma was right. Victory without purpose was just destruction. I'd destroyed the people who'd humiliated me. But what had I built beyond my own vindication? That's when I started the Ashford Foundation. Named for my father, who'd taught me that real power was quiet but meaningful. The foundation's mission was simple: supporting women rebuilding their careers after periods of absence or underestimation. Women who'd left the workforce to raise children and couldn't get back in. Women who'd been pushed out by discrimination or harassment. Women who'd been told they weren't good enough, weren't young enough, weren't the right fit. Women who'd been invisible and were fighting to be seen. We offered training programs, seed funding for businesses, mentorship from successful women across industries, legal support for those fighting workplace discrimination. We created a network, a community, a space where being underestimated was understood not as a personal failing but as a systemic problem we were working together to solve. The company, Thornton Industries, thrived under new leadership. We cleaned house ethically and financially, implemented transparent practices, promoted based on merit rather than politics, created pathways for diverse talent that had been systematically excluded before. Profits actually increased when we stopped hemorrhaging money through executive corruption and started investing in genuine innovation and employee development. And slowly, grudgingly, the business world that had dismissed me as just a trophy wife started to respect me as the strategist I'd always been. I was invited to speak at conferences, to sit on boards, to advise other companies on corporate governance. Every invitation, every request for my expertise, every introduction as Claire Matthews, CEO and founder, rather than as someone's wife, felt like a small victory. But the biggest victory wasn't professional. It was personal. It was looking in the mirror and recognizing myself. It was waking up in the morning and not having to perform invisibility. It was existing in the world as a whole person, complicated and powerful and flawed and real. It was the emails I got from women who'd seen my story and found the courage to leave their own diminishing marriages, to start their own businesses, to stop accepting being treated as less than. 6 months after the divorce was final, I was cleaning out the last of Daniel's things from the house, preparing to redecorate, to make the space truly mine. I found a box of old photos from early in our marriage, pictures of a younger me, smiling at the camera, looking happy and hopeful and so naive about what the years would bring. I almost threw them away, almost didn't want the reminder of who I'd been before everything. But then I looked closer and I saw something in that younger woman's eyes. Something I'd forgotten was there. Strength, intelligence, capability. It had always been there. I'd always been who I was. Daniel and his colleagues and that whole world hadn't made me less than. They'd just made me hidden. And I'd collaborated in that hiding because I'd thought patience was the same as acceptance, that strategy was the same as submission. I kept one photo. Just one. Me at a company dinner from 12 years ago, standing slightly behind Daniel, in a dress someone had probably mocked, with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I had it framed and put it in my office. Not as a reminder of pain, but as a reminder of endurance. Of the woman who survived being invisible by building something they couldn't see. Of the strength it takes to play a long game when every day makes you want to scream. Sometimes, people ask me if I regret how I did it, if I wish I'd confronted Daniel and his world earlier, more directly, without all the secrecy and strategy. If I wish I'd just walked away instead of acquiring a company and destroying careers. The answer is complicated. Part of me wishes I'd never been in a position where revenge felt necessary. Part of me wishes I'd valued myself enough to leave the first time I was dismissed instead of the 1,000th time. But I don't regret the strategy. I don't regret building power quietly. Because if I'd confronted them without that power, I would have been ignored, dismissed, told I was overreacting or too sensitive or should be grateful for what I had. Women are always told that. Our anger is always invalidated. Our hurt is always minimized. The only thing they understood was power, so I built power. And then I used it. The company today is worth 3 times what it was when I revealed my ownership. The Ashford Foundation has helped over 2,000 women rebuild their careers and start new businesses. I sit on 4 boards and advise 3 more. I've been featured in Forbes, Fortune, and Time. I've been called a ruthless businesswoman, a feminist icon, a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating quiet women. All of it is true. All of it is incomplete. What I am, really, is someone who was told she didn't matter and decided to prove otherwise. Someone who was made invisible and chose to become undeniable. Someone who was hurt and angry, and turned those emotions into fuel instead of letting them burn her from the inside. I'm not a hero. I'm not a villain. I'm a woman who got tired of disappearing and decided to take up space instead. They mocked my dress once, in that ballroom, at that dinner that changed everything. Called it vintage and outdated and a sign of my irrelevance. Now, that same company, the one I own, the one I transformed, has a logo I designed. A logo that's on buildings and letterhead and promotional materials. A logo that executives wear on their lapel pins and employees wear proudly on their badges. They mocked my dress once, now they wear my logo. And every time I see it, I remember the quiet woman who built an empire while everyone was too busy dismissing her to notice. So, if you were in my place, would you have exposed them or walked away silently? Would you have played the long game or confronted them immediately? Would you have used your power for revenge or just for escape? Tell me in the comments. Hit like and subscribe for more stories where power finally fights back. Because this isn't just my story. It's the story of every person who's been underestimated, dismissed, erased. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there needs to hear that being invisible can be temporary. That quiet can be strategic. That patience, combined with planning, can change everything.